Kinnah number 7, which was also written by Rabbi Elazar HaKalir, is perhaps the Kinnah with the strictest structure of all the Kinnos. Looking at each stanza, we have the following. Each stanza starts with the word Echa, not surprisingly, and is a question addressed to God. And the question is as follows, using the first stanza as an example, Echa adsta be'atacha, translating based on the art scroll. How did you rush in your fury, noting that both atsta, God's action, past tense, atsta, v'apecha, in your anger, both atsta and apecha start with the letter aleph. And so what is it that God did? Le'abed biyad amonim adomim emunecha. To destroy, le'abed, again with an aleph, to destroy in the hands of the Edomites those who, Adomim, also starting with an aleph, and Munecha, those who trusted in you, referring to Bnei Yisrael, also starting with an aleph. So we have the letter aleph 5 times. The first part of each stanza is going to be the appropriate letter of the aleph base, of course, in order, 5 times, referring, number 1, to the action that God did, number 2, to the characteristic or character trait that he used in performing that action, number 3, the verb of what God did in its infinitive form. Number 4, the people or a description of the people that caused this action, that actually carried out the action. And number 5 is a term of endearment towards Bnei Yisrael. So again, just reviewing from the first stanza, the 5 alephs are atsta, right? You rushed, be'apecha, in your fury. Le'abed is the verb, in its infinitive form, to destroy. Biad Adomim, the Edomites are the ones who carried out this destruction, and Amunecha is in reference to Bnei Israel, the term of endearment for the Jews. The next line in the stanza goes then to the next letter of the aleph base, below zacharta, and you did not remember. That's standard. That's going to be the opening phrase of the second line of each stanza. But you did not remember bris ben abasarim. So we have a triple base in reference to something important in our history, and here in this case the covenant that God made with Abraham. Asher berarta levchunecha, that you selected from those who you tested, asher birarta, that you selected, again, starting with the base, livchunecha, for those whom you tested, again, starting with the base. Then we have 5 bases, in this case, again, a triple base, in reference to Bris Ben Abasarim, right? So this is something that God had done for us previously, something positive that God had done for us in the history of Bnei Israel. Asher birarta livchunecha, that you did something to us, right? Something positive. Livchunecha, again, a term of endearment for Bnei Israel. So those are the 5 times we have then the next letter of the aleph base, in the first stanza being the letter base. And then the stanza third line starts uvechein, and therefore, in the first stanza, bitinu, right, which is translated as therefore we have proclaimed, but that is going to change with the aleph base. Here it's a base. It could be proclaim, it could be cry, it could be anything of that sort, some verb that we as Bnei Israel do. And what is it that we call out? Zachor Hashem mehayolanu. Right? Remember, O God, what has occurred to us. There are a number of interesting points I think we should make with respect to this Kinnah. First is that to contrast the Kinnah with the last chapter of Echa. The last chapter of Echa, of course, starts with the pasuk Zachor Hashem ma'hayalanu, remember, O God, what has befallen us, and then goes on to talk about all the terrible things that happened to Bnei Israel during the destruction of the Beis Mikdash and the events surrounding it. However, here in the Kinnah, it's a little bit different. It's true that the first line of each stanza does, again, repeat or retell the destruction of the temple and all of the terrible events surrounding that destruction. But then the second line contrasts it with the positive that God had done to us in history. So now, when the question comes up at the end of each stanza, Zachor Hashem ma'hayalenu, right, or when demand comes up, or the prayer goes out, God, please remember what happened to us, it's not clear whether that's in reference to the bad that happened to us, which is the way the Archwell translates it, or whether it's the good that God had done to us before the destruction. And it's this contrast, as it seems, that we want God to remember, right? And it makes that contrast makes the destruction even worse, right? God, how could you cause all of these terrible things to happen to Bnei Israel during the destruction of the Beis Mikdash and all the other things that happened on Tisha B'Av, and not remember the great goodness that you had done for us previously in history. Issue number 2 is, again, here we have this structure of the Aleph base. So it's a good place to ask then, why do we find the structure of the Aleph base? Why do we find it in Eicha? And why do we find it in so many of the Kinnos? So the Medrash Tanshe gives 2 answers to this question. The second of its answers, which is the one that I'd like to just touch upon first, is that the 22 letters of the Aleph base are parallel to the 22 creations in the world. And the 22 generations from Adam to Yaakov Avinu, and of course the 22 letters itself. The suggestion that all of creation comes out with that there are 22 things created, and that parallels the Aleph base, and therefore is the reason why we use the Aleph base in Eicha or in the Kinnos, is one that is highlighted in the Kinnah that we say the night of Tisha B'Av. It encompasses the whole world, and it's important to note that the destruction of the temple was not a local or even a national event. Of course, it was. It dashed the hopes of Bnei Israel. It destroyed the whatever political sovereignty that may have been left at that time period. But it's a universal destruction. It's a universal tragedy. The world, the universe, no longer operates, no longer functions as it should, in the way that God wanted it to. And therefore, in the Kinnah recited on Tisha B'Av night, we speak about the zodiac, the different constellations crying and calling out to God, weeping, because of the destruction, because the universe is no longer the same. And so the 22 letters are also in mourning, and the creations, which are done through God's speech, are also in mourning, because no part of creation can remain the same after the purpose of creation has been destroyed, has been lost. So that's the second answer of the Medrash. The first answer of the Medrash perhaps is a little bit more mundane, but I think gives us some important insight, which is So Eicha is written in an Aleph-based structure in order that the book can be ready and known and easily memorized, such that all Jews can remember it and recite it. So that's true for Eicha. What about the Kinnos? The suggestion then, by the Kinnos following the structure of Eicha, is that the Kinnos also should be constantly on our lips. They should be something that we should remember. They should be something that's easily recalled. But is that really necessary? So do we need Kinnos beyond what we already have in Eicha? It's not Eicha, Kinnos. Of course it is. It's referred to as such by Chazal. So why do we have new Kinnos? So on the one hand, so of course any new tragedy that occurs, and we're going to attach to Tisha B'Av as we do with all tragedies that occur to Bnei Israel. So those require new Kinnos. So that's certainly understandable. But do we need new Kinnos for old events? Why is Rabbi Elazar HaKalir still writing Kinnos for the destruction of the first temple? Didn't Yirmiyahu take care of that hundreds and hundreds of years before Rabbi Elazar HaKalir? Why new Kinnos for an old event? And I think the answer to that is that as history marches on, and we look back at an event, we have new insight into the event, or we have a new approach to the event, we have new perspective on the event. So here in this Kinnah Zayin, Rabbi Elazar HaKalir adds in a structure that is not found in Kinnos. Right? Yirmiyahu, in the 5th parak of Eicha, is mourning, only mourning the destruction. And Rabbi Elazar HaKalir, in his vantage point, is saying, yes, true, of course it was terrible, it was horrible, there's mourning, there's weeping, but let's look at it in contrast to how it was. Just like at the Seder, when we start off with Avadim Hayinu or Ovdi Avazara Hayavosenu, right? We start off in contrast, Maschilim Bignusim Masayim Mishmach, we start off with the negative in Jewish history, and then we end off with the positive to contrast the fact that we were slaves and now God freed us and gave us the Torah. Not just that we got the Torah, but the contrast from going from slaves to receiving the Torah is what's highlighted. And then Rebbe Elazar Kalier is doing the same thing here. It's not just that the temple was destroyed, that's horrible enough, but the temple was destroyed after you loved us so much, after all the great things that you did for us. How could that be? That's the line that Rebbe Elazar Kalier adds above and beyond what's already in Eicha. And the truth is that we need more Kinnos on the destruction of the Beis Mikdash. Why? Because now we're in a totally different vantage point than Yirmiyahu was, and that and that Rebbe Elazar Kalier was. Imagine that Rebbe Elazar Kalier, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, could bring them to nowadays, and he told them, he told them there are 7 million Jews living in Eretz Yisrael. Right, there's 7 million Jews. We have political independence. They would dance with joy. They'd be so happy. They wouldn't believe you. And then say, it's really terrible. We have all these problems with the government. We have problems with this. We have problems with this. They'd laugh at you. They'd say, what are you complaining about? There's 7 million Jews living Alad Masa Kodesh, right? There's 7 million Jews living in the Holy Land. You're complaining about this? But the truth is, and they're right. And what we have, when we're able to see with our own eyes, is so far beyond what they had. We should never forget the great joy we should have in that, and the privilege that we have in seeing that. But the truth is that the problems that we identify now are real problems too. And the fact that we have political independence and we don't have a Beis Mikdash now highlights for us what does the Beis Mikdash alone mean, right? And so our forefathers were perhaps unable to formulate what's the difference between having a Beis Mikdash and having political independence. It all went together. But we see now that those two are separable. And by having one and not the other, by having political independence and not having a Beis Mikdash, we highlight more as to what the Beis Mikdash means to society, right? The peace it could give, the unity it could provide, the ability to see the hand of God in everything. All that is still lacking, even in our present day. And so we need new Kinnos to look at old events. And I hope that there's somebody out there who can write these Kinnos for us.